when the question of the Pentagon Papers came up. What happened was the New York Times got him, as you know. And Bradley, he couldn't stop pacing around. He had to get the Pentagon Papers. The Times had been stopped, and he said, we got to get those Pentagon Papers. I came out of an editor's meeting, and my deputy said, there's a phone message here for you. There's a Mr. Boston says to call him at this number. Well, it was a 617 area code, and that was Boston. Mr. Boston and Boston, something's going on here. And call from a secure phone. So the Statler Hotel was across the street at that time and had a bank of telephone calls. And I went to one, I called, and a man said, now go to another phone and call from there. I went to this other phone, said, this is someone you know. I said, yeah. And this is Dan. Yes, so you were talking about a secure phone? I said, yes. So this is Dan. And he said, if I can get you the Pentagon Papers, will you print them? Will the Washington Post print them? I said, yes. He said, is that a commitment? I said, I can't give you a commitment till I ask Bradley. So I went over to back to the office. I said, Ben, what would you want to get a copy of the Pentagon Papers? He said, I'd give my left one for that. And I said, well, if we get them, will we print them? He said, if we don't print them, there's going to be a new executive editor of the Washington Post the next day. So I met Dan at a rundown motel.
It was a secret source, but it eventually becomes known.
With Dan Ellsberg, yeah. And so I went up into this hotel room, and there were these beds with thousands of pieces of paper.
Wow.
These are cables, these are assessments by various officials and so forth, but the direct cables between some very high classification. I said, Dan, you know what I'm here for? He says, yeah, go to this address in Cambridge and pick up 2 boxes. So I went to a cab driver and I said, go to this address, and it was in Porter Square, Cambridge. A woman came to the door, and I went to the door. Said, a friend has said that you have some boxes here. She said, yes, they're in the cellar. So there were these 2 there used to be Xerox boxes that were about 2.5 feet long and so high. I had the cab driver move them into the cab, and I had the cab driver bring it up to that room in the motel. And there were, Dan said, I want you to take these 2 boxes. I said, do they take 2 boxes? No, the 2 different sets. I said, well, 1 set's enough. He said, no, I want you to take 2. I said, what's the other one for? He said, well, it's for a politician. I said, well, Dan, I can't do that. He said, that's the only way I'll do it. And I had to break a rule of mine, which is you don't have any secret dealings with, really secret dealings with politicians. I finally agreed I'd take 2, and he said, I want you to hold those until you get a call from a certain member of Congress of where to meet him. And I tried to talk him out of it, but I wanted that box so much, and Bradley wanted that box. So the time came, I reserved 2 seats, I still have it somewhere, in American Airlines. 2 front seats, first class, Mr. Bagdikian and box. So I took the box. The word came that as I landed at the airport, go directly to Bradley's house. Don't come near the office. So I went to Bradley's house, and there was his daughter, Marina, selling lemonade to all these people coming into her father's house, lawyers and editors and so forth. So I picked the 4 people who covered national security for my staff. Don Oberdorfer, he was the fastest writer, so I said, you do the one for tomorrow morning, and the others, they're sorting papers into articles for the future. At first I appointed one of our fastest editors to have, where they'd hand it down and he'd copy edit it. And then there was a courier that had a motorcycle that would take it down to the paper and set it as it ran in. And we were doing that, and then pretty soon the chairman of the board, Beebe, came in. We're arguing that we needed to run the papers. And Bradley and I, the lawyers were very resistant to the idea. And Beebe flew down from New York, and I said, Fritz, we have an obligation really to the public to print these things. He said, I respect that, Ben, but I have an obligation to the future of the Washington Post, and I don't want them to be so fined that it might destroy the paper.
There was an intense argument between the lawyers and, well, basically it was the lawyers, along with the corporate types. I think Fritz Beebe was part of the conversation at that point, plus Ben Bradley, and then yourself, and exactly who else from sort of the editorial side, I'm not clear, but it was several of you in the Bradley house. And at some point that fateful evening where a lot of these things were decided, the newspaper did not want to publish, and instead of not publishing, they were going to announce that they were going to publish, that they had the papers and they intended to publish. And that was a compromise to ameliorate the newsroom, which would have all revolted, which you pointed out to them. And at one point you utter a very famous line, that the way to assert the right to publish is to publish. 2
things happened there.
Yeah.
One was when the lawyers said, well, the way to assert to publish is to the courts. I said, no, the way to publish is to publish. And the other one was they were then arguing about putting a notice that where we have it and we may publish them. And in the meantime, that crew I had working inside to sort the papers to write, they'd been doing that for hours, and it was then about 6 or 7 o'clock, and Bradley had ordered catering in some sandwiches and stuff. And they came in, and my friend Don Oberdorfer, with whom I had collaborated on many stories before for the Saturday Evening Post, came in, and someone said, they're talking about writing a notice saying that we have the papers, but we aren't going to publish them right away. And he said, that's the shittiest idea I ever heard of. And that was the end of that argument.
Yeah, in your book, Double Vision, I guess, you have a whole chapter on the Pentagon Papers, and you have that moment. It looks like that took the air out of the room. All of the opposition went away with that comment.
Bradley and I were the only ones then who were still pushing. The editor, the editorial page, and his assistant went along with this stupid notice idea.
Right.
But it was the fact that these reporters came in, and one of them expressed their shock with that way. The shittiest idea I ever heard of. It suddenly brought reality back. And it finally ended up, Catherine was giving a big banquet at her mansion, and she was on the phone with Bradley, telling her what was going on, and Bradley arguing what I was arguing, and she kind of wobbly. But at the last minute, she said, okay, we'll print. And we did. And I respected her for that.